hey, New York, you can't deprive people who aren't residents of New York their right to keep and bear arms and their right to self-defense while they are in New York.
We are the Armed Attorneys. Today we're talking about an important new lawsuit that you have to know about. We're going to be talking about what is the basis of the suit, what happens if this thing goes through, if the plaintiffs in this case are successful, and what the chances of success are. But before we begin, show your support for the Second Amendment by hitting that like button. And today's video is brought to you by our friends over at Aura. To understand all of this, we got to have a little bit of background on some really important Second Amendment cases. This is a good refresher anyway.
It is a good refresher. So we have the basis of everything, right, which is the Second Amendment, our individual right to keep and bear arms. And we've got these cases that we have to rely upon over the last decade and a half, right? Because that's really when our important Second Amendment jurisprudence comes out that you need to refresh and recall. The first one being DC versus Heller. We actually met Dick Heller at SHOT Show this year.
Ago.
Lovely gentleman.
Yeah.
I was like a little bit like, it's very exciting, it's like meeting a celebrity.
Get the guns.
I know. I was like, all right. So we've got DC versus Heller telling us that you have that individual right to keep and bear arms for protection in the home only, right?
And as applied to the federal government.
As applied to DC specifically.
Yep. But that takes us to our next case, which is McDonald versus City of Chicago. And this is where we look at the selective incorporation doctrine of the 14th Amendment. It takes that ruling in Heller and it applies it to all of the states, saying, hey, guess what? The states, you don't get a free pass on infringing on the Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. This applies to you as well. And that takes us to another important case, Catino.
Right. So that's your argument by the anti-gunners that, sure, we're all entitled to muskets, but nothing past what was in existence when the Second Amendment was ratified. No, the Supreme Court has said absolutely not. Arms are arms. Modern arms are still arms to which you have a constitutional right. And finally, we have our mic drop Second Amendment case, New York State Pistol and Rifle versus Bruin, which is where we, I guess, wrap all this up in a beautiful little test so we know exactly what infringes upon the Second Amendment. If a law does invoke the right to keep and bear arms and it restricts the right to keep and bear arms, you must find a historical analog.
Yeah, it's presumptively unconstitutional.
Yep. And the government has to find a historical analog from 1791 or thereabouts to say, aha, there was a gun law in place that looked a lot like the one that we're proposing here when the Second Amendment was ratified. So that's all of our good Second Amendment jurisprudence that we have to rely on, right? You have an individual right, not as a militia. You have a right to keep and bear arms. You have a right to modern arms, and you have a right not to have your gun laws be something that wasn't in effect in 1791 because we want to implement the original intent of the founders. So next, we're going to talk about the success of this case, what we think is going to happen going forward. But first, what do you need to be successful as an individual in America in 2024? You need protection from identity theft.
In 2022, the U.S. FTC reported that Americans lost $8.8 billion to identity theft and fraud, a 49% increase over 2021. But you can protect yourself for a fraction of the cost. That's why I'm excited to tell you about today's sponsor, Aura. You've heard me tell this story before. I tried it out for myself. I Googled one of my sister's phone numbers and immediately found her home address, which is pretty scary because she has her information hidden by law because she's a former felony prosecutor.
That's where Aura comes in. Aura has almost every internet safety tool you'll ever need, all inside one app. Aura's app features a VPN, password manager, real-time credit and identity theft monitoring, internet parental controls, and protects your devices from malware. And on top of data breach notifications, Aura proactively identifies data brokers exposing your information on the web and automatically submits opt-out requests on your behalf. They'll even opt you out of junk mail and telemarketing lists.
Let Aura do the hard work of keeping you safe online. If you sign up right now, Aura will give you a 2-week free trial with our link. Go to aura.com/armedattorneys or check it out, linked in the description below. All right, so let's go into this first thing. What are the two things that are in, and what is the basis for the suit? What are they challenging?
So this is, and by the way, just sort of, I guess, as a point of interest, there's actually one of the named plaintiffs is a Newsmax host.
Fun.
So we've got named plaintiffs who say, hey, look, I am not a resident of the state of New York. Right now, New York, to their chagrin, has to issue licenses to carry handguns to residents. However, if you are not a resident, so you do not own any property in the state of New York, because that's one of the qualifiers is property ownership within the state, You cannot obtain a license. They do not issue non-resident licenses, and they do not recognize any other state's license. And so the basis of this lawsuit is, hey, New York, you can't deprive people who aren't residents of New York their right to keep and bear arms and their right to self-defense while they are in New York. And to me, this is particularly important because, like, as Texans, I think we live in this lovely bubble where we've got good gun laws, and also, like, I can drive 2.5 hours, and not only am I still in Texas, I'm still in Houston. You kind of forget, you go up to all those like states on the east that are kind of smushed together.
Yeah.
And like, you're going in and out of New York, right?
Yeah, but
So-
you could drive 6 hours in any direction. Well, and if you're not still in Texas, you're in states that recognize your Texas license to carry, don't require a license,
Yes.
and you're not going to have any issues carrying.
You're gonna have no issues. So, particularly important when you do not live in Texas, when you're in one of those smaller states.
Yeah, you live in the Northeast.
Yes, exactly. So, essentially, this lawsuit seeks to make the state of New York either issue licenses to non-residents or, importantly, recognize every other state's license, or at least some other state's licenses, put some criteria in place. And that would potentially, we have a case in front of us that could force national reciprocity.
Yeah, so there's two grounds that they're kind of pushing here, and it's kind of a why not both situation
Mhm.
because ultimately they're asking for both sets of relief here. But we have our violations to the Second Amendment kind of going through that string of cases that we went through earlier. I think it's pretty clear. Hey, look, this is a violation of the Second Amendment. We're
Yes.
talking about, is the Second Amendment implicated here? Answer yes. Therefore, the government would need to justify
Mhm.
this infringement based on the text, history, and tradition of the Second Amendment. Is
Right.
this something that would have been
Yeah.
legitimately regulated at the time?
So, yes, if I am going between the states in 1791, am I allowed to be armed? And I don't know of any law that would have prohibited that.
Right. Well, and we start with that great presumption that it
Mhm.
is unconstitutional infringement. And then it's up to the government to
Mhm.
justify that this is something that would have been legitimately regulated at the time. I bet they're going to come up short on this one.
I think they are.
But that's not just our only one. So we got our Second Amendment violation. We also have a privileges and immunities violation. This is where we have our kind of think full faith and credit. So we have that as our second backup argument.
So what we can't do is we can't inhibit the right of people to travel freely between the states, which is very, very important. Also, I think we have this issue of like, which people bring up all the time. And sometimes as a lawyer, there's no good answers. People call, people send in messages to us and they say, hey, why don't these states have to give full faith and credit to gun licenses the same way we do driver's licenses, the same way we do marriage licenses? And I'm like, that's a great point. They really should. And then people are like, I'm like, yeah, I know, but there's nothing we can do about it until this makes its way up to the Supreme Court and someone actually makes a decision on the merits of that issue. This may be that case, right? And there's a really good argument.
Yeah. And with the privileges and immunities, they use a two-step test for, is there a compelling governmental interest of why this state shouldn't recognize another state's, insert, law or mechanism there. Well, we're going to intertangle this thing with the Second Amendment, and I don't think that they're going to be able to use that two-step test when it comes to a fundamental constitutional right like they did in New York State Pistol and Rifle Association. And so I think that both of these are very good arguments.
Very good arguments. So, Richard, crystal ball, what's going to happen?
I think our absolute worst case scenario on this suit is the state of New York is forced to issue licenses to non-residents.
Yes, I agree with you. Best case scenario,
Why not both?
national reciprocity.
National reciprocity. And I think that there's compelling and good reason to believe that that could be the absolute outcome in this case.
I think it absolutely could. So we'll see where it goes. Bear in mind, this suit was just filed. So Richard and Emily of the year of our Lord 2029 will be telling you about the Supreme Court case. But it is exciting. It is important that you follow along with these cases as they arise because gosh, you never know where solicitations going out all the time to be plaintiffs in like cases. In fact, there's a very similar case that is filed in the state of California right now. You never know how you might need to participate, get involved, even if it's just by word of mouth to tell people what's going on.
Yeah. So if Gun Owners of America, if these named plaintiffs get their wish list, we're going to be messing up New York's licensing scheme
Mhm.
just a little bit more. We're going to be forcing them to issue licenses to non-residents. We're going to force the state of New York to recognize licenses from other states, and we're going to bar and hold responsible and stop the enforcement of all the. There's a lot of different little miscellaneous provisions that the government would be enjoined or stopped from enforcing, and ultimately maybe we get attorney's fees at the end of the day.
Wouldn't that be good?
Wouldn't that be
Lawyers, guns, and money.
good? But we're hope you enjoyed this discussion. If you did, consider subscribing, hitting that like button, and help us fight the anti-2A algorithm by sharing this video.
And as always, please leave us a comment below, ask us a question. Until next time, we're the Armed Attorneys.